Welcome back to Evolve Your Intimacy, the podcast where we talk honestly about love, sex, connection, conflict, and the emotional patterns that shape our most intimate relationships. I'm Dr. Stephanie, licensed professional counselor, certified sex therapist, and the founder of Evolve Your Intimacy. This episode is part of a series exploring the deeper frameworks that impact intimate relationships, not to label or pathologize, but to give you language for what's happening right underneath the surface. Today, we're talking about attachment styles, the hidden blueprint behind how you connect and how you respond to closeness and distance, and why the same patterns keep showing up over and over again in your relationship. We're going to break down anxious, avoidant, and secure attachment style dynamics, how mental health can intensify these patterns, and what it actually looks like to move towards secure, connected, functioning together.
Guys, I get it. If you have a penis and access to the internet, you've been flooded with ads for erectile dysfunction medication. Bright colors, slick branding, Spark, Chew, Rocket, whatever they're calling it this week. And all of them follow the same model. You see the ad, you want the medication, you click the link, and suddenly you're in a subscription. Most of these companies are not built around medicine. They're built around recurring billing. Next thing you know, you've got 5 unopened packages sitting in a drawer, and your credit card is quietly getting charged every single month. You just forgot to cancel. My name is Robert, and I'm the founder of Shameless Care, and I don't believe medication should be used to sell subscriptions. Erectile dysfunction is personal. It's medical. It is not a billing strategy. At Shameless Care, you order what you need when you need it. No forced subscriptions, no auto shipments you didn't ask for, no games. Just physician-led care on your terms. Because medication should solve a problem. It shouldn't create a new one. Go to shamelesscare.com and use coupon code EVOLVE. That's shamelesscare.com, coupon code EVOLVE.
There's a moment in almost every relationship where you stop and think, why do we keep having the same fight just with different words? Why does one of you reach while the other pulls away? Why does one feel safe one moment and terrifying the next? Here's the truth most people never get taught. Your relationship isn't built on love, it's built on attachment. And attachment is a blueprint that was formed long before your partner ever entered the picture. Attachment is the emotional blueprint that shapes how you connect, how you bond, and how you respond to closeness. Attachment is not just about how you love when things are going well, it's about how you respond when things feel uncertain. When you don't get that text back when you think you should, when your partner's tone shifts, when intimacy changes, when conflict shows up. It lives inside your nervous system, and it influences how you experience trust, how you tolerate distance, whether you feel space as neutral or is it threatening, and how you interpret your partner's behavior, how you regulate yourself during conflict, whether you escalate and shut down or you stay grounded. And most importantly, it shapes the meaning you assign to your partner's action, because two people can experience the exact same thing and have completely different internal reactions to it. This work originates from John Bowlby, and it was expanded through observational research by Mary Ainsworth through what's known as the stranger situation experiments. And Ainsworth observed how children responded to separation and then reunion with their caregivers. And what she found changed how we understand relationships entirely. Children who experience consistent, responsive caregiving developed what we call secure attachment. They learned that when you reach for someone, they respond. When you're in distress, you can be soothed, and connection is safe. But children who experienced inconsistency, unpredictability, or emotional unavailability did what humans are wired to do. They adopted. Some learned, I have to stay close and hyper-aware to keep connection. Others learned, I shouldn't have to rely on anybody. I'll take care of myself. And those adaptations become attachment styles, not flaws, not diagnoses, adaptations. So, research across multiple large-scale studies show that approximately 50 to 60% of adults are securely attached. Around 20 to 25 fall into the anxious attachment, and around 20 to 25 fall into avoidant attachment. A small percentage experience what's called disorganized attachment, and that's often linked to trauma, where there is both a desire for closeness and a fear of it. But statistics don't tell the full story because attachment is not fixed, it's fluid, and it can shift. Based on the relationship you're in, based on your partner's attachment style, based on stress, life events, and mental health, someone who is generally secure may look anxious in a relationship where there's inconsistency, or in an avoidant relationship where they feel overwhelmed. And honestly, here's the clinical reality. Even those as secure will show insecure patterns under stress because the nervous system is activated. We don't respond from logic. We respond from learning, from memory, from protection, which means attachment is not a label, it's an entire system, a dynamic, responsive system designed to answer one core question. Am I safe in connection right now? And that system becomes most visible, not when things are calm, but when your relationship feels uncertain. Anxious attachment is rooted in inconsistency. Love was present, but it wasn't always predictable. There were moments of closeness, connection, reassurance, and moments where that connection felt really unavailable, distracted, or uncertain. So the nervous system adapted to the only way it knew how. I need to stay alert to maintain connection. This is not a conscious thought. This is called conditioning. And over time, the body learns connection can change quickly. Safety is not guaranteed, and I need to monitor in order to stay close. So instead of relaxing into love, the system organizes around protecting it. And the core fear of all of this is I will be abandoned, replaced, or no longer chosen. And that fear doesn't just live in thoughts. That lives in your body. And it shows up as a tightening in your chest. Maybe your stomach drops, a sense of urgency that feels hard to ignore. Your nervous system has this pattern called hyperactivation. And hyperactivation means that the attachment system is constantly scanning for potential threats to connection. Not because the person is overreacting, but because their system has been trained to notice those subtle shifts. And this creates a heightened sensitivity to the tone change. Why did that sound different? Maybe delays in communication. Why haven't they responded yet? Subtle behavioral shifts. Something feels off. And here's the most important distinction. These reactions are not random. They're a pattern recognition system that have been overgeneralized. And research says individuals with anxious attachment engage more frequently in rumination, meaning their mind loops on rational concerns. They experience emotional amplification, where feelings escalate quickly and intensely. And they score higher on the rejection sensitivity scale, meaning that they're more likely to perceive potential rejection, even in ambiguous situations. The research also shows increased activation in brain regions associated with threat detection, particularly during moments of perceived relational distance. So, in other words, their brain is not just reacting emotionally, it's reacting as if something important is at risk. Because the system is activated, behaviors often emerge as attempts to restore connection. These can include reassurance seeking. Are we okay? Do you still love me? Maybe some emotional intensity during conflict, not because the topic is always severe, but because the meaning feels high stakes. Difficulty self-soothing without partner response. Regulation becomes internally dependent. Over-interpretation of natural behaviors. Silence becomes rejection. Space becomes disinterest. And not now becomes not you. And this is where many couples get stuck. Because from the outside, these behaviors can look like neediness, overreacting, too much. But from the inside, these are attempts to regain emotional safety. And in intimacy, this is where anxious attachment becomes deeply relational. Because intimacy is not just physical, it's regulatory. Sex, touch, closeness. These are not just expressions of desire. They are expressions that communicate, I matter, I am wanted, I am safe with you. So when intimacy is present and connected, the anxious partner often feels grounded, secure, emotionally regulated. But when intimacy is inconsistent, emotionally disconnected, or it declines without reassurance, that nervous system can interpret it as a loss of connection, which leads to heightened insecurity, increased pursuit or initiation. They're trying harder, stronger emotional reactions, not because of the physical act itself, but because of what it represents. So, some critical misunderstandings can occur when partners misread what's happening. They may think, they just want more sex. They're just being demanding. They're never satisfied. But clinically, what is happening is something very different. They're seeking emotional regulation through connection. They're trying to return to a sense of self for safety, closeness, being chosen. And when that need is misunderstood or even dismissed, the cycle intensifies. Because now it's not about connection. It's about, why doesn't my need for connection feel safe to express here? Avoidant attachment develops in environments where emotional needs were not consistently met, or were minimized or dismissed or met with discomfort. Sometimes it looks like caregivers who provided for physical needs but maybe not emotional ones. Responses like, "You're fine," when the child was clearly not fine, or some subtle messages that vulnerability was inconvenient, too much, or unnecessary. So the nervous system adapted in a very different direction. Closeness is not reliable, so I will rely on myself. And over time, that adaptation becomes an identity, not because the person doesn't need connection, but because needing it didn't feel safe. And that core fear is activated. I will lose myself or become overwhelmed. This is not a fear of love. It's a fear of what happens inside of closeness: losing control, being consumed by someone else's needs, not knowing how to meet expectations, feeling emotionally flooded without a clear way to respond. That nervous system pattern will deactivate, and deactivation is where anxious attachment amplifies, avoidant attachment suppresses. The deactivation is the nervous system's way of saying, this is too much, and reduce intensity. So instead of moving toward connection under stress, the system moves away. And this can look like emotional numbing, shutting down during conflict, needing space to think or process or even regulate your emotions. And importantly, there is not a lack of care. It's a strategy for maintaining internal stability. And research shows us that avoidantly attached individuals show reduced outward emotional expression under stress, even when internal distress is present. They demonstrate an increased activation in the brain regions associated with emotional suppression and cognitive control, and are more likely to downplay the importance of the relationship in self-report measures, meaning they report lower satisfaction in their relationship when emotional demands feel high or constant. And there's also research suggesting a disconnection between the physiological arousal and that reported emotion. So what does that mean? It means your body may be activated, but they are not consciously identifying or expressing it in the same way. So let's talk about some behavioral patterns, because the system is oriented towards self-reliance. Certain patterns emerge: emotional withdrawal during conflict, not as punishment, but as regulation; difficulty articulating internal states, I don't know what I'm feeling, is often genuine; preference for independence over interdependence; relying on others can feel unfamiliar or risky; minimization of relational needs. It's not a big deal. I'm fine. But these behaviors are so often misunderstood as disinterest, lack of effort, emotional unavailability. But internally, what's happening is overwhelm without language. And in intimacy, this is where avoidant attachment can become particularly complex. Avoidant partners often experience physical desires and sexual interest, can engage in physical comfortability when it feels contained and predictable, and they may use physical connection as a way to connect without needing to verbalize emotionally. However, when challenges arise, intimacy becomes emotionally loaded. And when sex or closeness starts to carry expectations like, this should make us feel closer, this means something about our relationship, how can we fix disconnection? The avoidant nervous system can interpret that as pressure. And that's going to lead to pulling back, reduced desire, feeling overwhelmed or shut down. Not because they don't want connection, but because the intensity of the expectation exceeds their capacity for regulation in the moment. And so here's some nuances that most people miss. Avoidant individuals do not lack emotion. They feel deeply, but they have learned implicitly that expressing those emotions may not be safe, effective, or understood. So instead of saying, I'm overwhelmed, they create space. Instead of saying, I need a moment to process what I'm feeling, they go quiet. They ghost you. And instead of saying, I need you, but I don't know how to show it, they completely disconnect. And the internal experience this is where the empathy becomes critical, because while the anxious partner fears, I'm going to lose you, the avoidant partner feels, I'm going to lose myself. So when we step back, it's not always about leaving the relationship. It's about trying to stay regulated enough to remain in it. And this dynamic is the most common and most misunderstood patterns in intimate relationships. And one of the most important things to understand is this is not random. It's not about incompatibility. It's systemic. It's a predictable interaction between two nervous systems that learned very different ways to stay safe in connection. And there's a cycle. It often begins very subtly. The anxious partner senses distance, not always something obvious. Sometimes it's like a shorter response, a change in tone, less initiation, a feeling that something is off because their system is wired to detect shifts in connection, right? They move towards connection. They might ask questions, seek reassurance, increase emotional or physical closeness, or try to fix that disconnection. From their perspective, this is what they call repair. But from an avoidant partner's perspective, this can feel like pressure, not because the request itself is unreasonable, but because their nervous system interprets intensity as something to manage. So the avoidant partner moves to regulate. They might withdraw, go quiet, change the subject, need space. And here's where this cycle tightens. The anxious partner experiences that as withdrawal. This is confirming their fear. It becomes, I'm losing them. And so they pursue more intensely, more questions, more urgency, more emotional expression, which increases pressure on the avoidant partner, who then pulls back further, and the cycle escalates. So let's talk about what it looks like in real time. It can happen over hours or seconds, and a simple interaction like, are you okay, can turn into, why are you pulling away? I'm not pulling away. You always do this. I can't do this right now. And suddenly both partners feel misunderstood, frustrated, disconnected, even though both started from a place of connection. So, again, some research consistently show that anxious-avoidant pairings report higher conflict frequency, often around the same reoccurring themes. They experience lower perceived relationship stability, even when the commitment is present. They show increased emotional exhaustion because both partners feel like they're constantly trying but not landing. And there's evidence that these couples can experience high emotional intensity and strong attachment, especially early on, which is why many describe the relationship as passionate but unstable. So, what makes this cycle so powerful is not just behavior. It's the meaning each partner assigns to the behavior. The anxious partner's internal narrative often sounds like, I'm not enough. If I were more lovable, they wouldn't pull away. I need to try harder to keep this connection. And the avoidance internal narrative sounds like, this is too much. I can't meet these expectations. I need space or I'm going to shut down. So while one partner is moving closer to preserve the connection, the other partner is moving away to preserve stability. And the clinical truth is both partners are attempting to regulate, but this part often gets missed. This is not one partner caring more, one partner being the problem. This is two different regulation strategies colliding. Like I've said, one moves toward to feel safe and one moves away to feel safe without even being aware of it. The more the anxious partner pursues, the more overwhelmed the avoidant partner feels. The more the avoidant partner withdraws, the more unsafe the anxious partner feels. So each partner's attempt to solve the problem becomes the very thing that maintains it. And why is this awareness important? Well, because you can see the cycle, you can name it. And when you can name it, you can create space between stimulus and response. Instead of, this is you, it becomes, this is our pattern. And that shift is everything because you stop fighting each other and start understanding what's happening between you. So the bottom line is, this dynamic is not about one person needing to change completely. It's about both partners learning how to recognize when the cycle is activated, how to regulate themselves before reacting, how to communicate needs without triggering the other's defense. Because the goal is not to eliminate differences. The goal is to stop those differences from turning into disconnection. And that begins with understanding. You are not fighting each other. You are both responding to the same underlying fear, just in opposite directions. Attachment and mental health are deeply intertwined, not because one directly causes the other, but because they amplify each other in real time. Attachment is the relational blueprint, and mental health is the internal landscape. And when those two systems interact, what you get is not just behavior, you get intensity. And so why does this matter? Well, a lot of couples come into therapy believing, this shouldn't feel this big. Why does this escalate so fast? And honestly, the answer is often because what you're seeing is not just the situation in front of you, it is past conditioning, current emotional state, nervous system activation, all of this happening at once. So let's talk about anxious attachment and mental health. When someone has anxious attachment, their mental health is already oriented toward detecting potential disconnection. So when mental health conditions are layered in, that sensitivity increases. So generalized anxiety disorder adds a baseline of chronic worry, what if thinking, future-focused fear. So instead of they haven't texted back yet, it becomes, what if something's wrong? What if they're pulling away? What if I did something? And the mind doesn't just notice uncertainty, it fills it in with the worst-case scenarios. Depression shifts the internal narrative. So let's move into how depression affects this. Depression in avoidant individuals often presents differently. It's instead of the visible sadness, you may see some emotional flatness, low engagement, maybe some withdrawal from connection. And it can look like disinterest, but internally it's often low energy, plus low emotional access, plus low motivation, which makes this connection feel like effort instead of relief. So what happens when we have trauma? Trauma reinforces the need for control and self-reliance, especially when past experiences taught you that others are unsafe. Vulnerability leads to harm. Dependence leads to disappointment. So the system doubles down on, I will handle this myself. This can look like difficulty trusting, avoidance of emotional conversations, strong boundaries that feel rigid rather than flexible. But what happens when we have chronic stress? When stress levels are high, work, life, pressure, the avoidant system becomes more protective. You may see increased irritability, lower tolerance for emotional conversations, faster shutdown responses because the system is already overwhelmed, and connection in those moments feel like more of a demand. So what happens when they intersect? When attachment and mental health combined, reactions don't just increase, they accelerate. Reactions become faster. There's less pause between the trigger and the response. The emotional intensity is amplified beyond the situation itself, and it's very hard to interrupt because logic has less influence over the nervous system. Logic has less influence once the nervous system is activated. And this is why couples often say, I know I'm overreacting, but I can't stop. I know they're not the enemy, but it feels like they are in the moment. Because at that point, you're not operating from cognition, you're operating from activation. Let's talk about some key clinical insight. Because insight is important. Understanding your attachment style is very important. Knowing your patterns is important. But insight alone doesn't regulate the nervous system. You can know that this is my anxious attachment, this is my avoidant response, and still react in the same way because the body moves faster than the mind. So how do we shift? And that's where the hard work comes in. Instead of how do I think differently, we need to begin asking how do I regulate differently? How do I slow my body down when I feel activated? How do I tolerate discomfort without immediately reacting? How do I stay present when my instinct is to pursue or withdraw? Because sustainable change happens when you learn to work with the nervous system and not just the narrative. So, attachment explains why you react the way you do. Mental health explains how intense that reaction becomes. And when you understand both, you stop personalizing everything that's happening in your relationship and you start recognizing this isn't just about us. This is about how our systems are interacting in the moment. And that awareness is the first step towards changing it. So, when we talk about secure attachment is not the absence of conflict. It is the presence of safety within that conflict. Because conflict is inevitable in any intimate relationship. Two people with two different histories, two nervous systems, two different expectations, and two different communication styles are going to experience friction. The difference is not whether the conflict happens. The difference is what happens inside of it and what happens after. Secure attachment creates a foundation where conflict does not automatically equal threat. It may feel uncomfortable, it may feel intense at times, but it doesn't feel like, oh, this relationship is at risk. I'm about to be abandoned. I have to shut down to survive this. Instead, there is an underlying sense of, we're going to find our way back. And the core capacities for this. Secure attachment is built on a set of relational capacities that can be learned and strengthened over time. You have to have some emotional regulation, and that emotional regulation is the ability to stay within a tolerable emotional range. Not perfectly calm, but not overwhelmed to the point of reacting impulsively, taking a breath before responding, recognizing when you're activated, pausing instead of escalating, clear communication, saying what you mean without excessive defensiveness or indirectness. And this includes expressing your needs directly, naming your emotions without blame, reducing mind-reading expectations. So instead of, you should know what I need, it becomes, here's what would help me feel more connected. And you have to create a tolerance for vulnerability because being able to stay open even when it feels uncomfortable. Vulnerability will always carry some level of risk, and secure attachment does not remove that risk. It increases your ability to tolerate it without shutting down or overcompensating. So you have to create this ability to repair after a rupture. And this is one of the most defining moments of secure relationships because a rupture will happen. Misunderstandings, missed moments, disconnection, and secure partners come back to the conversation, acknowledge the impact, reconnect intentionally, and they don't expect perfection. Research has shown securely attached individuals report higher relationship satisfaction across long-term studies. They experience lower physiological stress during conflict, meaning their heart rate, their stress hormones, they all return to baseline more quickly, and are more likely to engage in collaborative problem solving rather than that win-lose dynamic. There is also strong evidence that secure attachment is associated with greater emotional resilience, higher levels of trust and intimacy, more consistent sexual satisfaction over time because safety allows for that presence, that openness, and connection. So what does this even look like in practice? Secure attachment is not theoretical. It shows up in very observable ways. So secure partner asks directly for needs. I'd like more time together this week. They stay present during discomfort. They don't immediately leave, shut down, or escalate when things feel hard. They do not escalate when their partner is dysregulated. They recognize this is not the moment to match intensity. They take responsibility for their impact, even if the intention wasn't harmful. They say, I can see how this affected you, and I want to understand. They are not perfect communicators. They are consistent returners to connection. So, if you're listening to this, you're probably asking, what does secure attachment even feel like? And secure attachment feels like you can bring something up without fearing it will destroy the relationship. You don't have to perform or prove your worth constantly. You can be close without losing yourself, and you can have space without losing the relationship. There is a flexibility. It's not rigid. And the most important distinction is secure attachment is not about never getting triggered, because everyone's going to get triggered. Everyone has moments of defensiveness, withdrawal, reactivity. The difference is what happens next. Secure attachment is returning to connection after you are triggered, returning after the argument, returning after the misunderstanding, returning after the moment you didn't show up how you wanted to. And it sounds like, hey, can we try that again? I don't like how I responded earlier. I want to come back to this in a better way. And this is where many people get stuck. They believe secure attachment means I should always handle things perfectly. And when they don't, they assume they're failing. But the goal is not perfection. The goal is repair. Because relationships are not built on getting it right every time. They're built on how reliable you come back to each other when they don't. And the bottom line is secure attachment is not something you either have or don't have. It's something you practice. You practice in small moments. You pause instead of reacting. You speak instead of assuming. You're staying instead of withdrawing. You're returning instead of avoiding. And over time, those moments create a new experience. One where connection doesn't feel fragile, it feels resilient. And this is where change becomes actionable, because insight without action keeps couples stuck in awareness without movement. This is the point where you take everything you understand about attachment and you begin to apply it in real time when it actually matters. Not when you're calm, not when you're thinking clearly, but in the moment when your nervous system is activated and your instinct is to fall back into that pattern. So for the anxious partner, the shift from protest to vulnerability. Protest behaviors are the things you do to try to get connection when you feel connection slipping. You criticize, throw out accusations, escalation, repeated questioning. They make sense. They come from fear, but they often land as pressure. So instead of creating connection, they create defensiveness. So in practice, instead of, you don't care about me, you're pulling away again, why are you ignoring me? Try, I'm feeling disconnected right now. I'm noticing I'm getting anxious. I think I need some reassurance. Can you help me with that? This is not minimizing your need. This is changing how you express it. Because when vulnerability is clear and direct, it reduces your partner's defensiveness. It gives them something actionable, and it increases the likelihood of connection. And equally important, you begin building your own capacity to name your internal state without escalating it. For an avoidant partner, the shift from withdrawal to intentional space. Withdrawal often happens quickly and without explanation. From your perspective, it's regulation, but from your partner's perspective, it's disconnection. So the work is not to eliminate your need for space, it's to stay relational while taking it. So in practice, instead of disappearing or saying nothing, try, I'm starting to feel overwhelmed. I need to take a few minutes to process. I'm going to step away, but I will come right back. This does two things at the same time. It protects your nervous system from overload. It protects the relationship from uncertainty, because the biggest trigger from the anxious partner is not space. And when you communicate your need clearly, you create predictability, safety, trust, without forcing yourself to stay in a state where you can't engage effectively. So for both partners, the most powerful shift is moving from blame to pattern recognition. Instead of, this is your fault, begin to say, this is our cycle. And honestly, that language matters because it changes the dynamic from me versus you to us versus the pattern. And so what does that even look like in practice? It looks like, I think we're going to get in that loop again. I'm starting to feel like I'm chasing and you're pulling away. Can we pause and reset before this escalates? This creates awareness in the moment, and awareness creates choice. Regulation first. This is one of the most important clinical principles in relationship work. You cannot solve relational problems in a dysregulated state. When the nervous system is activated, the heart rate increases, stress hormones rise, cognitive processing decreases, defensive responses increase. And this is why conversations that start small can escalate quickly. Not because the issue is that big, but because the body is reacting as if it is. Research in interpersonal neurobiology and relationship science shows slowing physiological arousal improves communication outcomes. Grounding techniques reduce emotional reactivity. Pausing before responding decreases that escalation cycle. So in simple terms, when your body is calmer, your communication is clearer. What does the regulation look like in real time? Taking a breath before responding. noticing your body, saying, I need a moment, instead of continuing to engage while activated. Physically grounded. Put your feet on the floor, slow your breath. That is not avoidance. This is you preparing yourself to respond instead of react. So let's go a little bit deeper. What are you really building here? What you're really building here is capacity. The capacity to stay present when your instinct is to pursue or withdraw. Express needs without triggering your defensiveness, right? Tolerate comfort without escalating or shutting down. And this doesn't happen all at once. It happens in small interruptions of the patterns, where at one moment where you pause instead of react, you explain instead of disappear, you name that cycle instead of blaming your partner. Change does not come from eliminating your attachment style. It comes from modifying how it shows up in your behavior. The anxious partner will learn, I can express my need without escalating. The avoidant partner learns, I can stay connected without becoming overwhelmed. And together you learn we can experience the same trigger and choose a different outcome. And that's how secure functioning is built. Not perfectly, but consistently. Attachment is most visible in intimacy because intimacy is where all of the layers come together at once. Your body, your emotions, your history, your expectations, your nervous system. Sex is not just physical. It's one of the most vulnerable relational experiences you can have, which means it will activate attachment patterns faster than almost anything because intimacy requires the vulnerability, being desired, presence, being mentally and emotionally engaged, emotional availability, that ability to give and receive connection. And when those things feel uncertain, your attachment steps in. So how does your attachment show up in your sexual interactions? Sex is often where couples misinterpret each other the most because what does it look like? Higher desire versus lower desire. I'm too much to I'm not enough. Pressure versus disinterest. Different attachment needs playing out throughout the body. And for the anxious partner, intimacy is deeply tied to that emotional safety. Sex is not just about pleasure. It becomes feeling chosen, feeling wanted, feeling connected. So intimacy feels safest when it's consistent. Inconsistency can feel like instability, which activates fear, eye contact, presence, affection. These matter as much as the act itself. It's affirming verbal and nonverbal cues that say, I want you. And how it shows up sexually is partners may desire sex more frequently, especially after disconnection or conflict, feeling hurt or rejected when intimacy is declined. Initiate as a way to restore closeness, and they struggle with sex that feels purely physical or disconnected. And this is where misunderstandings happen because their partners may experience this as pressure, neediness, always wanting sex. But internally what's happening is they're trying to regulate through connection. They're asking, are we okay? Do you still want me? Am I safe right now? But they're doing that through intimacy. For the avoidant partners, intimacy is more complex because while there can absolutely be desire, there is also sensitivity to pressure and expectations. It allows for autonomy. Choice matters more than obligation. It's not overloaded with emotional demand. Too much intensity can feel overwhelming, and how that shows up sexually for an avoidant partner. Avoidant partners may enjoy sex when it feels right, spontaneous, or contained, but they struggle when intimacy is tied to emotional reassurance, pulling back when they sense expectation or pressure, experience decreased desire when conflict is unresolved. And again, this gets misinterpreted. The anxious partner may think they don't want me, but the internal experience is often, I feel overwhelmed. I don't know how to stay present. So instead of engaging, they create distance. And there's this pursuit-withdrawal dynamic in sex. This is where attachment patterns become physical. The anxious partner moves towards, initiates more, seeks closeness, uses intimacy to reconnect. And the avoidant partner moves away. They feel pressured, need space, pull back. And over time, this creates one partner feeling rejected, one partner feeling pressured, and both partners feeling misunderstood, which, again, leads to less satisfying sex, less frequent sex, and more emotional difference. When intimacy becomes a battleground for unmet attachment needs, desire decreases because pressure shuts down desire, fear disrupts presence, But when intimacy becomes a space of safety, desire increases naturally, not because you're trying harder, but because your nervous systems are no longer in protection mode. Secure intimacy is not about frequency, performance, or technique. It's about safety, presence, responsiveness. It looks like initiating without fear of rejection, or defining your worth, saying no without threatening the relationship, staying emotionally connected even if sex doesn't happen, repairing the moments of disconnection. And this allows desire to ebb and flow, space without panic, closeness without pressure. So this week, I want you to try a weekly relationship reset. Set aside 20 minutes, no distractions, and you're going to take turns answering these questions. This week, I felt closest to you when? This week, I felt distance from you when? One thing I need more of is? And then I want you to add, one moment I felt desired by you was, or one moment I felt disconnected physically was. We're not interrupting, we're just listening. After you talk, I want you to sit in some sort of physical contact, maybe skin to skin, but no talking for 2 minutes. Because connection doesn't always need words. Sometimes it just needs presence. So why this matters is nonverbal connection regulates the nervous system and it reduces stress, especially in relationships where words escalate quickly, communication feels overwhelming, because intimacy is not talked through, it's felt. Your sexual relationship is not separate from your attachment system. If sex feels tense, inconsistent, or emotionally heavy, the question isn't just what's happening sexually, it's what's happening underneath the relationship. Because when safety increases, desire has room to return. It feels awkward or unfamiliar. You're doing it right because you're stepping outside of the pattern. And that's where change begins. But if this hit home to you in some way, share this with your partner. Try the things that I suggested and make sure that you are giving your relationship the intention it needs. Relationships are built on intention and predictability. You have to be intentional. If this episode resonated with you, don't just sit with it, use it. Take one piece from today and bring it into your relationship this week. Because insight without action doesn't create change. Intentional behavior does. If you want deeper support, tools, and structured guidance, you can explore my workshops and relationship resources at evolveyourintimacy.com. And if this episode helped you feel seen, understood, or gave you the language for something you couldn't quite explain, share it with your partner. Sometimes the most powerful way to start a conversation is not by finding the perfect words, but by pressing play. And if you haven't already, make sure you follow the podcast and leave a review. It helps more people find this work and start changing the way they show up in their relationships. Until next week, stay connected, stay curious, and stay intentional about the way you show up in your most intimate relationships.